Okay, let's talk today about what causes bodybuilders' belly. This is a condition that you see in a lot of the pro bodybuilders today, where they come out on stage with these kind of bloated stomachs. And I've checked various websites to find out some of the theories about what causes this. And there's so many theories I've actually had to write it down on this paper here. But first of all, let's talk a little bit about when did this start. I competed myself in the 70s, and I can attest that you never ever saw a bodybuilder step on stage with a bloated stomach. It just didn't happen. If a guy had a pot belly, it usually meant he was fat and he wasn't ready to compete, and he didn't compete. But today you have a situation where you have guys stepping on stage with these stomachs that protrude when they're standing relaxed, and yet the odd part is that when they flex their abdominals, very often they have a marked degree of abdominal definition. You know, the six-pack and the abdominal ridges. Now the question is, how could a guy have a bloated stomach at rest and yet have pronounced abdominal development when he flexes? It just doesn't seem to go together. The average fat guy in the street with a beer belly, he can flex all he wants. He'll never show us. He has one big ab, I should say. One big ab, you know. Well, you know, when did the bloated belly actually start? And the answer to that is it started with the advent of insulin entering bodybuilding. A lot of the websites and blogs have said this, and it really is true, because growth hormone was around a good number of years. If it was growth hormone alone, you would have seen a good amount of bloated stomachs on the posing platform or in contests, and yet it was very rare until insulin started entering the picture. And I've written this in my articles, but one of the reasons why you see guys today competing at 250 pounds or above is a combination of three. Of course, there's training and genetics involved, but it's usually a combination of three anabolic drugs: huge amounts of anabolic steroids, pronounced amounts of growth hormone, and fairly large doses of insulin. That particular combination has a tremendous effect. It's The medical journals haven't really reported this yet as far as a hypertrophy effect, but it's evident in bodybuilders. Of course, you have to have the genetics to have this drug combo work. It's a misconception to believe that anyone could take this particular trio of drugs and look like Phil Heath or Kai Green or any of these guys. You have to have a combination of genetics and response to drugs. That's important. Another thing to consider is, now, if this particular triumvirate, let's call it, of anabolic drugs is causing the bloated stomach, then why is it that not every pro bodybuilder has this type of look? I mean, a lot of the guys seem to be using this particular trio of drugs, but not everybody seems to get that bloat. Now, what could that be? I think it's two things. I think in the one case, there's a genetic factor involved. Some guys, for example, might have more receptors in their, let's say, central portion of their body, their abdominal area, for both IGF-1, which is insulin-like growth factor, and insulin receptors. The less receptors you have through a genetic quirk, the less responsive the organs will be to large amounts of hormones. Of course, this I quickly add is just a supposition on my part. I have no evidence to prove this, but it kind of makes sense. It's a kind of a rational explanation, because I know for a fact guys that have used that particular combo and have not shown the bloated abdominal effect. Okay, so let's look now. Let's kind of segue into some of the prevalent theories as to. Again, I picked this up on various websites and blogs. Let's look at these theories. I had to write them down because there's quite a few of them about what causes this kind of strange, macabre, bloated belly look that turns off so many people. Of course, the most frequent explanation is the excess usage of growth hormone, IGF-1, and insulin. Now, of course, insulin and IGF-1, as I said earlier, they do have receptors on internal organs. And if you do stimulate those receptors by the presence of large amounts of these hormones, the organs will indeed grow. Now, the thing is, the problem I have with this particular theory, and the thing that nobody ever talks about, is if we assume that a large degree of the bloated belly is in fact caused by enlarged internal organs, there would also be some pathology evident along with that huge enlarged internal organ type of anatomy. In other words, there would be heart problems probably. And just to give an example, a lot of people have talked about how there's a lot of insulin and IGF receptors in the colon and the small intestine, which is correct. That's true. Now, what would happen is if these particular organs, your colon, your small intestine, if they were stimulated to excessive growth through using, let's say, excess IGF-1 or growth hormone producing IGF-1 and insulin, if these organs grew to an unnatural size, you would lose something called the peristaltic action. That's the involvement of small muscles that are located in the lining of the intestine that serve to move food along the digestive tract. Now, if you lost a certain degree of peristalsis, the food it would move along too slowly, and one of the main symptoms of this would be extreme, I'm talking really bad constipation, and it would be pretty evident. I mean, I don't even think these guys would be capable of competing if their organs were that enlarged by this growth hormone. And also, there's another factor that I find curious that makes me doubt this. I'm not saying there's no organ growth at all with growth hormone, insulin and steroid usage, but I've run across a couple of pro bodybuilders who, when they competed, did have that kind of bloated belly look, and yet a year after they retired, I won't mention any names because I don't want to embarrass anybody. One of them was a Mr. Olympia. A year after this person retired, he had a bloated belly in his last 3 years of competition. The year after he retired, I ran into him at the Mr. Olympia contest. He appeared to be about 60 pounds lighter, but what was most noticeable is the complete absence of any kind of belly. His stomach was flat as a board. I even commented to him on how much healthier he looked now that he stopped competing, which he readily agreed with, which was kind of funny. Okay, so that's the first theory, but we'll kind of put that on the back burner. We're not going to say that there's no effect of growth hormone IGF-1 steroids on organ growth. I'm just saying that I think it's a little bit more than that. That's probably a factor, but that alone can't explain it. And there's also a tangential factor I'll add here is I used to tell people that the only way to definitively ascertain what caused this bloated belly look would be to have a pro bodybuilder or anyone affected by this bloated belly look to undergo a medical test called a CAT scan. A CAT scan would kind of like show what the internal organs look like and possibly even what's causing any kind of bloat. That's what I thought. But it turns out, since I made those statements, when I made those statements, I actually had not spoken to or met any bodybuilder that actually underwent CAT scans who had the bloated belly. In the interim, since then, I have come across or read about a couple of bodybuilders who did have the bloated belly, who underwent a CAT scan, and I was surprised to learn that the CAT scan showed absolutely nothing. There was no enlarged organs, nothing that would account for the bloated belly, yet it was still there. So that's another reason why I wonder about this organ growth type of thing. Okay, now let's look at the next prevalent theory is insulin causes an accumulation of visceral or deep-lying abdominal fat. So if we look at this theory, what they're saying is that these guys have shredded abdominals, they have intercostal muscles, no apparent superficial body fat, and yet they have an abundance of visceral fat. What is visceral fat? Visceral fat is deep-lying abdominal fat. It lines your internal organs. It's very deep. Visceral fat happens to be the most dangerous type of body fat. Body fat. What's body fat? Body fat is fat. I guess that's fat in bats. But anyway, body fat. Body fat. It's the most dangerous type of body fat because it's what they call labile. It's constantly being released. And what happens is when that visceral deep-lying abdominal fat, when it travels to your liver, It's kind of turned into saturated fat and also cholesterol. And because of that, it tends to promote a type of medical condition called fatty liver, non-alcoholic fatty liver, they call it, which is epidemic now and is associated with severe insulin resistance, type 2 diabetes, cardiovascular disease, and cancer. So visceral fat is very dangerous. But let's get back to the bodybuilding aspect. This theory says, now insulin, by the way, insulin is known to stimulate body fat, but it does so mainly in the presence of excess carbohydrates or excess calories. In other words, insulin alone, it would be difficult if you're not eating a lot of calories to get fat from insulin alone. And if you also kind of control your carbohydrate intake, your resting level of insulin will drop also. Now, but insulin itself, combined with excess calories and carbohydrates, without question, it does stimulate body fat synthesis because insulin is a storage hormone. It helps you store carbohydrates, it helps you store fat, and it also actually aids the entry of amino acids into muscle, which is a semi-anabolic effect, but more of an anti-catabolic effect. Maybe one day we'll talk about insulin, explain a lot of the misunderstanding about that particular hormone. But in any case, this theory again says that because of the insulin, the extra insulin that the bodybuilders are using, it's stimulating this huge amount of visceral fat in the deep-lying abdominal, and it's this visceral fat that's causing the abdominals to protrude, right? Now, here's the problem with that. The problem is that growth hormone actually opposes this particular activity of insulin. In other words, if you take growth hormone, you block the fat-producing effects of insulin. And insulin also works in reverse because when you take growth hormone, you tend to get you tend to get this condition called hyperglycemia, which is excess glucose in the blood. But when you take insulin, obviously insulin lowers blood glucose, you block that effect. So when a bodybuilder takes insulin and growth hormone, they're actually canceling out the side effects of both hormones, right? So the odds of also testosterone, which of course is used as an anabolic steroid, or even the anabolic steroid drugs themselves, which are basically synthetic manipulated forms of testosterone. All of these things also tend to block the acquisition or the accretion of visceral fat in the abdomen. So the question is, how could a pro bodybuilder have all this excess fat enough to the point where it causes his abdominals or his stomach to protrude? It doesn't make sense because, first of all, he's still active, he's working out, the calories are going to be burned. See, the good thing about visceral fat is that it's the most easily burned fat. When somebody starts to work out and goes on a diet, the very first amount of fat, the initial fat that burns on such a program is visceral fat. And the reason is that very lability. In other words, what I mentioned earlier, the fact that it's constantly being released into the blood makes it more prone to oxidation, burning, right? So if you add it all up, the odds of a guy taking growth hormone, steroids, and insulin, and working out, having a huge amount of visceral fat is not likely. So I think we could basically discard that one. Okay, another one. This is to me is self-evidently kind of silly. This one here, according to one website, the use of heavy weight causes a bulging of the abdominal area. Okay, there's no anatomical evidence that merely lifting heavy weights will promote a pronounced abdominal expansion effect. I remember years ago we used to, I don't see it much in the gym now these days, but years ago when the guys at the original Gold's Gym in Venice, when we did squats, we always used a lifting belt to kind of pull our stomachs in because, when you did squats, there was a lot of kind of pressure, outward pressure in the abdominal area. And by wearing a belt, you actually push the abdominals in like a girdle effect, which tended to kind of add a little bit of support for the lower back. So in our minds, at least, it gave us the idea that our lower back was being supported, therefore less chance of injury when we did heavy squats, right? So, but the thing is, it kind of relates to that because all these guys that did heavy squats years ago, none of them got protruding abdominals, and they used heavy weights. There was a Mr. Olympia named his name was Sergio Oliva. He beat Arnold in one of the Mr. Olympia contests, and he won the Mr. Olympia 3 times in the late 60s. He had a tiny waist, and he loved to do heavy squats. And as an Olympic weightlifter, he did snatches, which involve a squatting movement. Yet he had no protruding belly at all. None. So the odds of getting a protruding belly from merely lifting heavy weights, to me, is nonsensical. It doesn't make any sense. So let's discard that one right off the bat, right? Now, here's another one. This one seems to have a tinge of truth. It kind of makes you sit back and say, gee, that makes sense when you first read it. And this one. The abdominal bloat is the result of consuming excess food and calories. In other words, the bodybuilders are eating so much food that they're eating like small meals 12 times a day, and some guys talk about eating 700 grams of protein. And of course, this is going to make they're eating all these meals. It's gotta make the stomach protrude. And gee, what happens then? Don't you stretch the abdominal wall so it gets that situation where when you're standing relaxed, it's going to protrude and bloat out. And that would also explain when they flex it, they still have abs, but their stomach is protruding when relaxed because they stretched it out from eating too much food, right? Okay, here's the problem with this theory. That this is something that for some strange reason, the guys that write this in blogs and on the internet, they never think it through. Because one thing that hasn't changed since the days I competed or Arnold competed is when a bodybuilder prepares for a contest, he's trying to lose body fat. He or she is trying to lose body fat. They're trying to come in as cut and defined as possible. You think they're going to take in massive amounts of calories and eat 15 meals a day loaded with food? They're going to do that before a contest when they're trying to lose body fat? That makes no sense at all. It doesn't make any sense at all. Now the off season, yes, they do eat fairly large amounts of food. They don't. We had a thing called bulking up in the old days, where when there wasn't a contest imminent, we would kind of eat a lot of food to kind of gain muscle size. And yeah, we'd get fat. We'd get a little fat. We'd get a little bit of a stomach. But when we went on a diet, that all disappeared. All the stomach, all the abdominal bloat or whatever you want to call it. It wasn't a bloat. It was fat from overeating. That would all disappear when we went on either a low calorie, low carb, or both diet. So the thing is, and this idea of stretching the abdominal wall from excess food, that doesn't make any sense from an anatomical point of view. No, that doesn't make any sense. So, if it was excessive caloric intake, in other words, if it was excessive food, then it would actually be fat. These guys would have legitimate fat pot bellies. And it's one thing that's evident. You could say what you want about these guys. That protruding belly is not fat, because you could not have the abdominal definition that these guys have and have it just have a ton of fat underneath. It doesn't make any sense. It goes against the laws of physics. So, all right, here's another one. A sub unit of this one is bodybuilders show bloat because they have short torsos. Okay, the problem with this is that a couple of the bodybuilders with long torsos also have abdominal bloat. So again, we throw that one in the file marked G for garbage. The next one, here's another one that I like. Using the supplement creatine produces a water retention effect that is particularly evident in the abdominal area, producing the bloated appearance. Again, there's a semblance of truth to this. I can see how it started, because some users of creatine have this problem where they get a gastrointestinal effect, where they actually do get a little bit of a bloat. But the bloat is more of an internal thing. It very rarely causes the stomach to stick out. That would be intestinal gas from lack of digestion, which is possible, right? But it's rare. Another thing to consider about creatine is that most of the water stored when you take creatine is intracellular, not extracellular water. So it would not kind of hang out in the abdominal area and bloat you out. It just doesn't happen. Let's toss that one in the garbage too, okay? Okay, now, let's segue now. We've talked about some of the prevalent theories of what causes abdominal bloat. Uh, and we've kind of discussed some of them are questionable, some of the degree of possibility, like the hormonal effect of growth hormone and IGF-1, and insulin on those receptors in the abdominal area. There's a certain amount of credence to that because there definitely is receptors for those hormones in the gastrointestinal area. There's no question about that. But for the reasons I said, there's still a missing element in that theory. Okay, so what does cause the bloat? The first thing that I have to say, and again, I will clearly label this as a supposition on my part because I can't prove it, but I have no doubt that the abdominal bloat displayed by some professional or other bodybuilders is related to excessive doses of GH, insulin, and IGF-1. The thing that I also notice is that the abdominal bloat seems to be getting worse when the level of growth hormone usage goes up. I kind of have a theory that if a bodybuilder were to take, let's say, a fairly moderate steroid program, a moderate growth hormone program, by moderate I mean maybe 6, 10, 15 units at the most, and very small amounts of insulin, I don't think there would be a lot of cases of bloat around. I think this bloat has to do with the dosages being used. I've heard the other day, I was reading about one of the top bodybuilders. This guy's huge. Again, I won't mention his name because I don't know this man personally, and I can't confirm that he actually does this. This could be just internet gossip. But what it said was that this guy's taking anywhere between 36 and 50 units of growth hormone a day. The body produces at its most 1 unit a day when you're a kid, 1 unit. This guy's taking 50 times more than the body produces. Now, the thing is that extra growth hormone has got to be doing something pretty bad, especially if it's used for any length of time. I wouldn't be a bit surprised if that is involved in causing or at least as a sub-cause of the bloated look. And there's another thing about growth hormone which a lot of people overlook, and this is something that bodybuilders who compete in contests should be aware of. When you take growth hormone, you stimulate other hormones, and one of them is called aldosterone. What is aldosterone? Aldosterone is an adrenal steroid hormone. Just like testosterone and estrogen, it's made from a base of cholesterol. What does it do? It does a couple of things in the body, but its main function is to stimulate a excretion of potassium and a retention of sodium and water. Now, growth hormone potently stimulates aldosterone. Think about that for a second. A guy taking growth hormone all the way up to the contest, worrying about water retention, and taking huge amounts of growth hormone, which stimulate the most water-retaining hormone in the body, which is aldosterone. Kind of like working against yourself, don't you think? I'm wondering, again, this is a theory of mine, but I'm wondering if maybe that massive aldosterone output, when I say massive, I'm talking about when used in concert with huge amounts of growth hormone. I'm talking like the 36 units and above level. That's going to cause a lot of aldosterone output, right? Now, could it be that possibly the aldosterone is causing maybe a localized water retention in the gut? Not so much to cause any kind of medical problem, but possibly enough to maybe produce that kind of weird look where you have a bloating appearance at rest, and yet when you flex your abs, you still have those deep abdominals. It's a possibility. Again, I can't prove it. And another problem with that theory, by the way, is a lot of the bodybuilders also use diuretic drugs, which are illegal, but, so is steroids and growth hormone. So let's not talk about legalities here. Anyway, I mean, you know how efficient the drug testing tests are in bodybuilding. Anyway, the point about I'm trying to make is that using these potent medicinal or pharmaceutical diuretics is going to eliminate the excess water. So I kind of like killed my own theory there by talking that, the bodybuilder who takes diuretics is not going to have a localized water retention anywhere. If anything, he's going to lose too much water, right? Okay. Then there's effective cortisol, right? Now, the thing is, anabolic steroids kind of block the effects of cortisol, but there could be some sort of weird cortisol effect going on when you take large amounts of the trio of drugs I mentioned earlier. And the reason I even bring up cortisol is because when you have an overabundance of cortisol, you tend to have excess fat on the central part, the trunk part, the abdominal part of your body, right? It could be that somehow cortisol may be involved in stimulating some sort of fat response in the abdominal area. That might be. This is a kind of really way out theory, and I have to admit there's really not much credence to it, because again, these other anabolic drugs, they're going to block most of the effects of cortisol. But I'm wondering if the cortisol is still being produced, what is it doing? That's the question. So I'm kind of tossing it out there. Now, there's another theory of mine that, again, I've never seen this anywhere, but it's my theory, and I'm going to mention it here for the first time. This is going to cause some people to laugh, I know, but there's a condition called irritable bowel syndrome, right? Irritable, but without going into a lot of the symptoms, it's a kind of a lousy disease. It gives you a lot of gastrointestinal problems. But the thing that caught my attention is that, one of the symptoms I'll talk about, one of the symptoms is extreme constipation alternated with recurrent diarrhea. I don't know the guys, the guys using this trio of drugs. I'm not going to ask him that question. I don't know if this is what's happening to him. So again, this is a theory on my part. But the thing that caught my attention about irritable bowel syndrome is that the number one sign of it is a bloated abdomen. A bloated abdomen, right? Now, why would these guys get irritable bowel syndrome? Again, here's a theory. They have something called the microbiome, which is the population of bacteria in your intestine. In recent years, the research related to the microbiome has exploded. They now know that it affects just about everything, from mental functioning to cardiovascular to how your body uses your calories from fat, carbohydrates, protein digestion. It's unbelievable. I'm going to be writing a letter. I'm going to be writing an article in my newsletter, Applied Metabolics. I'm going to be writing it about all the nuances related to the microbiome, and how it relates to those who are involved in exercise and nutrition, all that stuff, because so far nobody has really written this stuff. And there's some hormonal effects of the microbiome that, again, known to certain researchers, but not known to the public at all. It's nowhere on the internet. Nobody's talking about this, but I will. But I'm wondering if maybe the use of these drugs, again, this is a theory, the use of these drugs, could it be adversely affecting the microbiome to the extent that somehow, remember, the microbiome, this population of trillions of bacteria, they're located right in that same area where the abdominal bloat occurs. Could there be a relationship between possibly an imbalance in the intestinal microbiome and the appearance of the bloated abdominal look in bodybuilding? I don't know. Again, nobody's tested this. Quite frankly, medical researchers, the people with the ability and the means to test this, they don't give a crap about bodybuilders' bloated abs. So unless somebody sponsors some study where they actually look into this, all of this right now has to be speculation. I'm just throwing out a couple of ideas. And speaking of ideas, this is my final theory, right? And again, this is something that I've never read anywhere, but it's something that I came up with. Again, I looked at all those theories and I said, it just doesn't add up. There's too many missing links. But wait a minute. How could these guys, I said to myself, how could these guys have such fantastic abdominals when they flex them, and yet such just huge bloat when they're standing on electrical. It looks like they were about to give birth to a child. How could the two go together? How could that possibly be? And I said to myself, now, wait a minute, abdominal muscles. The abdominals are a muscle group. What does growth hormone, anabolic steroids, and insulin do? They're anabolic. They stimulate muscle growth. Guys who are training for a show work their abdominals. Some guys don't work their abdominals. Some guys do. Some guys even use added resistance when they work their abdominals. If you exercise your abdominals, they're going to get thicker. Now, they're going to get thicker even if you use no drugs. When they get thicker, that's a good thing because that gives you that pronounced cubes, the six-pack look. You want that. That's desirable. What you don't want is an excessive development of the abdominals. And here's what people don't understand about abdominals. They don't understand the anatomy. What we call the abdominals, when we look at a six-pack, what we're looking at is only 1/3 of the abdominal musculature. It's called the rectus abdominis. When I was a kid, I mispronounced it in a gym. I went up to a coach and I asked him, I said, how do you develop the rectum abdominals? And the whole gym laughed. That's how I learned the correct pronunciation. But anyway, it's called the rectus abdominis, right? And the thing about that is that this is the interesting thing. It's not flat. It's not a flat muscle. It's what they call convex. It's a convex shape. In other words, it's kind of like this. It's curved. Remember the old TV sets, how the tube would kind of come out a little bit? That's the way your abdominals are naturally shaped, see? Now think about it. If they're naturally slightly protruding to begin with, and you dramatically increase the thickness of the muscle through a combination of exercise and huge amounts of anabolic drugs, what do you think is going to happen? It's going to thicken excessively. So when you flex it, because you got the muscle there, you're going to see pronounced abdominals, but you're also going to, when relaxed, because the abdominal muscles themselves are so thick, they're going to probably stick out and look a little bloated. Will they look bloated to the extent that we see on the bodybuilders? Probably not, which is why I think there's an additional factor involved here. I said earlier that the abdominals are 1/3 of the actual abdominal muscle mass, let's call it, right? The abdominals are the most superficial. They're the one, the rectus abdominals, the ones we call the six-pack. Those are the ones that are on top. Those are the ones you see. There's also the oblique muscles. That's the one in the middle. We know them for the muscles on the side. They kind of support them. They're on the side of the abdominals, and of course, when they tend to accumulate fat, they refer to them as love handles. Love handles. But anyway, the deepest part of the abdominals, which is a muscle that very few people talk about, it's called the transverse abdominis, and it's a horizontal muscle. Right? You can't see it. It's the third layer, the deepest layer of the abdominal muscles, right? Now, what this thing here, this muscle is kind of like inserts horizontally across the abdominals itself. And you know what it does? It holds in the abdominals. It holds in the organs. It acts like a natural girdle. When a woman gives birth, she's flexing, that transverse abdominal muscle is helping her push the baby out. In other words, it's exerting pressure. So what does it do in simple statement? It makes your abdominals flat. It gives you a flat stomach, right? Now, people listening to this are going to say, gee, that sounds pretty good. How do you work this muscle? Because I want a flat stomach. Hell, I want to have abs, but I don't want to have a pot belly with it. How do I work this transverse abdominals? It's not worked with normal abdominals. You don't get it when you do sit-ups. You don't get it when you do leg raises. How do you work it? Believe it or not, you suck your stomach in. You do what they used to call in bodybuilding the vacuum pose. Look at pictures of Frank Zane, some of the great guys from the 70s, or Mike Mentzer. Well, not so much Mike Mentzer, but Frank Zane. You'll see them kind of sucking in their stomach. It makes their waist look very small. When you do that, you're actually working your transversus abdominal muscles, right? Now, here's the thing. Now, how does it relate to the bloated belly? Think about it. When's the last time you saw any of these guys with the bloated belly When did they ever do a vacuum pose? I don't recall any of them ever doing a vacuum pose. I don't think they can even do it. So here's my theory. I think that possibly it could be that it's not just the hypertrophy, extreme hypertrophy of the rectus abdominis causing the bloated belly, but it could be a combination of extreme hypertrophy of the rectus abdominis caused by a combination of exercise and excessive anabolic drugs combined at the same time with an extreme atrophy of the transversus abdominis muscles. These bodybuilders cannot do vacuums. They're not working the muscle. If that thing atrophies combined with think about it, if that atrophies combined with an excessive hypertrophy of the rectus abdominal muscles, you're going to get a protrusion of the abdominals. Again, is it going to be to the extent that some of these guys show where their stomach seems to stick out like 2 feet out in front of their body? I don't know. I doubt. I don't see how it could be that extreme. But so I have to say there's probably still something else involved. But I wouldn't be surprised if this particular abdominal macabre anatomical situation also entered into the picture. So again, these are a couple of theories about what causes this this kind of weird condition. I just want to talk a little bit now about my newsletter. It's called Applied Metabolics Newsletter, and it's available at www.appliedmetabolics, one word, appliedmetabolics.com. And I started this newsletter about 9 months ago, and I started it for a number of reasons. For one, the quality of the bodybuilding magazines in terms of information had taken an all-time low dive. I mean, just garbage. Seriously, I wrote for magazines for 35 years, and when I look at them now, they embarrass me. I mean, seriously, the quality of the articles, I mean, there's rare exceptions. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying every article is a piece of garbage, but generally speaking, you're lucky if you find one decent article in the current magazines. The people that who are writing these articles, they're not writers. A lot of them don't have much knowledge. Some of these guys who are writing aren't being paid a dime. They're trading articles for ad space, and there's nothing wrong with that, by the way. There's nothing wrong with that, but the thing is, you're not going to put your all, let's say. You're not going to spend hours and hours of research writing an article that you're not being paid a penny for. It's not going to happen. As a writer, I can tell you that it's not going to happen. Trust me, it's not going to happen. Anyway, so I saw that, and then I went on the internet, and I looked at all these internet sites, tons of misinformation about nutrition, exercise, drugs, all garbage, all crap. The forums, these guys are talking about steroid routines that would kill somebody. And I had this publication, Applied Metabolics, in the 90s, and it kind of folded. It was a printed publication. It didn't get much marketing help, and nobody ever knew it existed, so it went out of business. And I said to myself, it's time to bring this back. So, and another aspect of this is that people always complain about the ads in the magazines. When I wrote for the magazines, people would approach me and say, hey, these magazines, they're nothing but big sales catalogs. For crying out loud, even the articles are pushing products. Why am I paying to buy a sales catalog, right? Can't they give us something that has pure information, evidence-based information that'll help us in our training and diet and lifestyle and general health without bombarding us with ads? Well, that's what my newsletter does. Applied Metabolics has no sponsors, no ads. It's all truth. It's evidence-based. And I will say, anyone who subscribes to this will save thousands of dollars, because I have already exposed, and I will continue to do, all the frauds and lies that are encountered in relation to fitness, health, nutrition, and medicine in this newsletter. I answer to no one. I'm not associated in any way with any supplement company. And just to give you an idea, I mean, this is some of the subjects that I've covered in the past, let's say 9 issues. For example, I had how to prepare for natural bodybuilding contests. What's the best diet and exercise routine to use? No BS, no crap. Just tells you the whole truth. I talked about the relationship between low carbohydrates and thyroid problems. Again, very rarely discussed, and when it is discussed, or the opinions are usually wrong. Another topic I talked about was do you need hours of aerobics? I see people, and we all see people who come to the gym and do hours of aerobics in an effort to lose fat. Is that really necessary, right? Another one I talked about was estrogen in supplements. A lot of the supplements you use actually contain estrogens that you don't even know about. I mean, you could be taking these supplements and building enough estrogen to cause, let's say, a subcutaneous fat buildup under your skin, and you wonder why you're looking smooth and you can't figure it out. Well, I exposed that in the article, right? I had a program that I use myself, which is it's a dental program. It involves 4 products that literally cures gum disease, prevents cavities, and cuts down your dental bills by thousands of dollars. It's not going to affect cosmetic dentistry. I mean, if your teeth have already fallen out and they're rotten, you're still going to have, those, what do they call it? Those fake teeth put in there. I forgot what it's called, but I had an article on the long-term effects of steroids. Another frequent question, what happened to those guys who use steroids year after year? What are they looking at? What's going to happen to them, right? I had an article about the truth about digestive enzyme supplements. Do they really help? Do they help you utilize food, protein, whatever? I had an article on the truth about pre-exhaustion training, which is a favorite technique of the high-intensity crowd. I also had an article on, what is it? There's a new fat law, a substance in natural foods that works it works better than any pharmaceutical fat drug that the doctors give out to lose fat. It works better, and unlike the drugs, there's no side effects at all, right? And I can go on and on. I mean, I also had a article where this is another frequent question where people want to know what the pro bodybuilders really take, how they eat and what drugs they take. So I actually outlined the exact, precise program of a guy who placed in the top 5 of the Mr. Olympia. I listed his exact food intake, and by the way, it wasn't enough to cause a bloated abdomen. But in any case, I listed his food intake and his precise drug program. As I said in the article, I don't recommend his drug program, but this guy got in absolutely unbelievable, fantastic shape using this particular program. So I'm kind of like telling everything. I'm not keeping any secrets, like they say. And then in the issue that's coming out next, which is June 1st issue, I'm going to have I'm going to look at I examined natural bodybuilding. I looked at pro bodybuilding. And now I'm going to look at the newest division of bodybuilding, which is the physique contests. I have a complete program for anybody who wants to compete in the men's physique contest that includes diet, exercise, and I also give a couple of my suggestions in the article because this particular program was based on a case study of one guy who was advised by 4 experts on how to get in the best shape of his life. And unfortunately, he wound up, he did fairly well in the physique contest, but he also wound up losing a huge amount of lean mass. And in my article, I'm going to talk about what he could have done, which would have probably completely prevented the loss of that lean mass. And by the way, in case you're wondering, this involves no drug use, no clenbuterol, no anabolic steroids, certainly no growth hormone or insulin, because this was for natural bodybuilding. And I do mean natural. That means no drugs at all. So I also have an article on this is a favorite topic of mine in this next issue, which is the relation between having big muscles and living a long life. It's something you'll never see in any bodybuilding magazine. My God, they're not going to write anything that might even suggest that building muscle could shorten your lifespan. And by the way, I'm not saying it does either, but there are certain practices that are common in bodybuilding that at the same time stimulate the aging process. I'm going to disclose exactly what these processes and pathways are, and I'm going to talk about how to get the best of both worlds, how you can stay muscular and fairly big for life if that's what you want, and also without limiting your lifespan. And again, these are in my newsletter, Natural Anabolics. Natural Anatomics is my ebook, by the way. That's also available at jerrybrainum.com. My newsletter is, see, my coffee's wearing off. I had a couple of cups, and it's wearing off. I'm getting like the brain fog now. Anyway, but the truth is, the newsletter is called Applied Metabolics. And again, the address is www.appliedmetabolics.com. If you subscribe, I absolutely guarantee you, have my word, that I don't care who you are, what you know, you will learn a lot in every issue of this newsletter. I'm giving it 100% of my effort. I'm working harder on this newsletter than on any of the articles I've ever worked in 35 years and 5,000 published articles. So give it a shot. And, to quote an old friend of mine, I'll be back.